to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. Obviously, immigration front and foremost, and really how the Trump administration's been handling it. Not good. And you think about it, not surprising, not handling it well. And what's interesting is I think it's funny that how Trump has really taken a defensive on this, and there's part of me that thinks he's surprised that there's any pushback at all. He's gotten away with so much in these few months that he's been president that, what's the big deal? And the thing is you think about what he has said about immigrants over the past couple of years. None of what's going on should surprise us. And in fact, we now find out that this was the plan right from Inauguration Day. And, as I tweeted out this morning, why is it that we're surprised that, there's some thought put into this? Understand the wealth class of this country, they have spent a ton of money, putting smart people into thinking positions to scheme and to plot and to come up with these ideas on when the crisis hits. As Milton Friedman said, when crisis hits, it's the ideas that are lying around. They're the ones who are putting all of the ideas all around. So it's not surprising to me that on Inauguration Day, they were talking about separating families and creating an environment to send a message. Not surprising to me at all. I mean, consider the words that have come out of his mouth. All the Mexicans are rapists. They're bad hombres. They all got AIDS. They're the worst criminals. They're snakes. They're illegals. Go back to their huts. The S-hole places that they come from. That they're violent and they're crime infested and breeding. And then today they're infesting. Like animals, they're infesting the country. And as a couple of the tweets that I saw go out today, immigrants built the country. Like it or not, we're all from somewhere else as far back down the line. This is not how you treat people. Sorry. And now we're hearing reports that even the people who are trying to come here the right way, they're being turned aside and mistreated as well. And you go, but hold on, they're trying to come here the right way. And we find out that, the backlog of immigration cases is just through the roof. And look, I don't see that they have any interest whatsoever in getting through those cases. And I think actually they've created a situation where it's getting to be so bad that there isn't going to be a fix. And that what you're going to end up having is a situation where they just go, well, we're going to get away with it. It's frustrating and it's angering because, we could be better than this. And then we find out today that obviously, the Republicans have always hated the UN. They've all, John Bolton, who said you could blow the top 10 floors off of it and nobody would notice. These are people who despise international cooperation. These are people who despise diplomacy. These are people who despise compromise. These are people who despise negotiating. And this comes from the guy who's the Mr. Art of the deal. I look at this and I go, every day this administration takes us to a new low. And, I can't believe how many people have told me, I thought it was bad yesterday, but today's worse. I thought we hit rock bottom. And, I said this when Joe Biden said that, Trump had hit rock bottom with, what was going on with John McCain and hoping he dies and all that. And I'm going, no, I don't think that's rock bottom. There's still bottom to get to. And don't give them a goal. Now there's talk, the Democrats are showing something of a spine. They're actually pushing to get something accomplished on this. You're seeing Democratic politicians down on the border, demanding action. That is a good thing. At the end of it, this is still a November issue. And it's a November issue that I truly believe the Republicans want to fight on. And it'll be interesting to see how this polls out and how we go to the polls and vote. But this is one of those, never let a good opportunity go to waste. While we're focused on what's going on with the border, and while we're focused on the immigration issue, today the Republicans unveiled their 2019 budget proposal, which, not surprising, they're calling for in excess of $500 billion in cuts to Medicare, $1.5 trillion in cuts to Medicaid, and $4 billion in cuts to Social Security over the next decade. And I'm going, how can you cut, money from Social Security? How is that possible that you're able to do that when that is a fund outside of the regular operating budget of our government? Well, they need the money because, hey, they gave away how much? $2 trillion to the very wealthy and to big corporations. This budget proposal calls for $5.4 trillion in cuts to our major domestic programs. And again, where does that money go? Well, it's going to be going back to the very wealthy. And this is why elections matter. This is why they spend so much money funding these politicians. And as we talked about yesterday, where are my Tea Party friends who were screaming about the budget deficits and screaming about the debt? Where are they now? Will it take them losing their things? Because, I have a friend who ran for state house back in 2016. And on election day, he asked me, can you go to, this polling place and hand out literature? And now understand, I believe that that's the worst use of time possible for anyone. I have never met anyone in my life who has shown up to vote and had someone hand them something and go, oh, I changed my mind. I didn't know. I've never seen that happen. I don't think it's ever happened. And I got to question the person if it ever did. But I said, you're my friend and you've been friends for a long time and you're a good dude, and I'll go out and I'll take some verbal abuse for you. Of which I did, because I didn't know that this section, this one little polling place, was the highest content of Republican voters in the county. It was the crazy of the crazy. And I met a lot of people in line while I'm standing handing out literature for a Democrat in a crazy Republican Tea Party area. In fact, this was the area, and you may remember the guy who, famously screamed out, "Get your hands off my Medicare! Get your government out of my Medicare!" Yeah, it's there. So just to kind of give you a thought, he was the typical person in line. And as I talked to each one of them, about what policies were coming up and why they should reconsider and why my friend was a good choice, it amazed me at how many 60-something, late 50s, 60-year-old men were walking around with carts with oxygen tanks on them. You know, they had worked in various industries. They had worked, you know, doing different jobs, and, you know, lung problems and all of that. And I remember asking them, you know, what are you going to do when they cut Medicaid? What are you going to do when they cut Medicare spending? What are you going to do when they go after the social safety net programs that provide you that oxygen? And, you know, people were just saying, well, you're just being cruel. I go, no, I'm being honest. I really want an answer. What are you going to do? Because this is going to happen. And it's not because I'm some genius or I have a crystal ball. It's because I know who these people are. They're going to give massive tax breaks to the rich. And where is it going to come from? It's going to come from the most vulnerable. That's what they do. It's what they've always done. No surprise. So when I see that, you know, you're talking about $5.4 trillion in spending cuts from, you know, most of our major domestic spending programs, I'm not surprised. When I see a $1.5 trillion cut to Medicaid, you know, I'm thinking about all those children who aren't going to get CHIP. I'm thinking about all those people in line who aren't going to get the oxygen that they were going to get. I'm thinking about in Louisiana, the thousands of people who were sent notices saying, hey, there might not be Medicaid money to keep you in the nursing home, so you may have to find other accommodations. Maybe the curb is a good place for you. So when I think about that, what we do to our own people, I'm not surprised by what they're doing to other people's kids. Not surprised what they're doing to the others. And we put up with it. I mean, this is the thing that gets me. We put up with this kind of treatment of our own neighbors, of our family members, of us, ourselves. So again, not surprising that we would put up with this, the kind of mistreatment of the others. Now, look, I don't have the answer on immigration. I think there has to be a pathway to citizenship. I think we need to be doing more internationally to make people want to stay where they're at. You know, maybe not encouraging wars all over the world. Just kind of a thought. One of the worst things we ever did was going into Iraq. You look at all the refugee problems we've created out of that and all of the turmoil around the world that we've created. To me, part of the solution is maybe solving some of the problems in some of these countries where people are coming from. Just a thought. But I think chaos is what we really want because it sells. It's good for business, especially the military-industrial complex. I just read a report the other day that said that, you know, there are more than 1 billion small arms, firearms, you know, in the world. And you go, more than 1 billion. That wow. Yeah, oddly enough, 46% of them are right here in the U.S. So now you look at the funding proposal. They're going to make massive cuts. And we hear yesterday that Donald Trump lost his lunch over the fact that Congress, the Senate, is only going to give him $1.6 billion to build his wall. You know, because they're going, well, incrementally, this is what we can afford. We'll pay a little bit more next year, a little bit more next year. He doesn't want it incrementally. He wants it all. He wants it up front. He wants it now. He wants all $25 billion in nice, neat little stacks right in front of him so he can play with it. And he doesn't understand how Congress can do this or why Congress would do this. And you go, because it's what we do. It's how we fund things. He's getting $1.6 billion to build a wall. You know where that $1.6 billion or trillion is coming from? It's coming from Medicaid. So we're going to kick Granny to the curb. We're going to kick kid children off the insured rolls so that we can begin to build a wall that hasn't worked in the past and to feed his ego. That's it. And are you okay with that? I personally am not. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend Sarah Kendzior is going to be here to share some of her thoughts on inmate 45343. Also going to talk a little bit about, maybe the leprechaun Jeffy Sessions getting the axe. And, well, what's going on the southern border. Get some of her thoughts on that. Quick break, right back.
90% of the wealth, 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1953. That was the day 26,000 members of the ILWU in Hawaii walked off the job. Their strike was a 4-day protest against the witch hunt convictions of the Hawaii Seven. Many docks and plantations immediately shut down. Stevedores refused to load military cargo headed to the war in Korea. At the height of the McCarthyite Red Scare, Union militants continued to be the primary targets of anti-communist hysteria. Longshoreman leader Jack Hall and 6 co-defendants had just been tried and convicted under the Smith Act. The ILWU denounced the trial and verdict as a frame-up. It was the ultimate move to bust the increasingly powerful union on the islands. The ILWU had come under heightened surveillance after successfully organizing stevedores and many sugar and pineapple plantations. The real trouble began after a long and bitter dock strike in 1949. Then Nebraska Senator Hugh Butler proclaimed the island to be firmly in the grips of a communist attack. HUAC arrived the next year to investigate the Red situation. In August 1951, the FBI conducted early morning raids to arrest the 7 on charges of violating the Smith Act. The arrests came as the ILWU threatened a sugar strike, having reached an impasse in contract negotiations. During the trial, it was clear the 7 were being tried not for anything they did, but for allegedly being part of a vast and secret conspiracy. The proceedings had the quality of a show trial, designed more to terrorize the public and labor movement than to prosecute any actual crime. Their convictions were finally overturned with the landmark 1957 Yates decision, which rendered much of the Smith Act unenforceable. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So my new favorite number, 45343. Yes, that is Paul Manafort's new name. I should put it kind of like Prince. When Prince changed his name from Prince to a symbol, this is the formerly known as Paul Manafort 45343. And I got to be honest, I was a little surprised that they locked him up. And here to share some of her thoughts on that, the IG report, also what's going on the southern border. I've asked our good friend Sarah Kendzior to come talk with us. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So were you surprised that they gave 45343 a room at the Gray Bar Hotel?
I mean, it's about time. I'm glad that they finally did it. I feel like he should have been locked up from the start. I know that there have been many times I've gone on this show and complained that if you put Manafort on house arrest, if you allow him privileges, he's going to violate the terms, and he's potentially going to harm the investigation and even harm other people. There's some people that are thinking, okay, Mueller gave him the rope so he could hang himself. And it's true. This is a guy who, despite a long and storied history of criminal acts, can't convert a Word document into PDF, got caught doing that, got caught witness tampering. And so now there was, another reason to finally lock him up behind bars. But there's been ample reason to lock up Paul Manafort since the early 2000s, and certainly, since the campaign and the aftermath. So I'm glad he's behind bars because he can't hurt people as effectively behind there. But I feel like it was an enormous risk to take to not just lock him up from the start. There are petty criminals who get treated much worse than Manafort, who committed conspiracy against the United States.
Yeah, if it were you or me or any one of us, we'd been locked up from day one. And, I loved some of the Fox News and some of the the pundit classes, well, he was just talking to friends. He wasn't witness tampering, sir. Just talking to friends.
It's just friends who are, members of the Russian mafia interfering with the sovereignty of our nation and tampering with an election. I mean, yeah, please. This guy is just, he's utter scum. He's got blood on his hands. His own daughters have said it, and, it's about time he's locked up. And, I hope the trial yields a just result. I hope the process of that trial is transparent and open to the American public.
Yeah, I miss Court TV. We should put that back on. This would be a good time to revive that.
Yeah.
Maybe this would be more This should be more popular than the OJ trial was.
It should. This could be like a pay-per-view spectacular event. I mean, quite honestly, if I were the Democrats, I'd be like hyping this shit up. I mean, it's amazing to me the sort of like coddling they do of people like Manafort, who are involved and implicated in so many, national and international scandals, associated with so many dictators and mobsters. I mean, this is, from the start, this alarmed me when he began to run Trump's campaign, and yet there's still this sort of like, oh, poor baby's finally locked up. It's like, this is a 69-year-old man who's devoted his whole life to ruining other people's lives. He should be locked up.
No, I'm with you. But, I remember going to the Cleveland convention, the Republican convention in Cleveland, and I was there with a number of other radio programs, and being the only one on the left side of things, or on the sane side of things, the hero worship that these other folks had for this guy. They had him up on a pedestal, the greatest man in politics, and they were all hoping just to get a glimpse of him, let alone to interview him. And
of Manafort?
Yeah, it was the most bizarre thing. But then again, it was the same thing with Stone and Bannon and the rest of them. It was just this kind of this cultish hero worship, and it was this weird world that I had gotten myself into, because there were like I think 2 or 3 other leftward leaning shows there at the Republican convention. And it was the weirdest kind of world.
It's grotesque. I mean, one thing that's fascinating to me is, of course, we all knew Manafort's background. You could get it from like Wikipedia. It wasn't some kind of secret that he was hooked up with crime dictators. And the same is true of, Stone, Michael Caputo, Bannon. And what I've noticed over the last few months is that, all 3 of the people I mentioned are under federal investigation. Or I'm not sure Bannon is directly, but certainly, Cambridge Analytica is. Obviously, the Trump campaign itself is. Caputo is under federal investigation. Roger Stone is under federal investigation. Yet, they are being put out. They're given special, TV events on networks like CNN. Bannon gets a full hour to himself, commercial-free, and they're often cited in articles about the Mueller probe as if they're somehow impartial witnesses to this, that they're just getting opinions. Like the New York Times will interview Michael Caputo, and they'll just say, Michael Caputo, Trump's former campaign advisor, thinks Mueller is full of shit. And it's like, well, obviously so, because he's being investigated by him and doesn't want to go to jail. But they leave out vital pieces of information, like Michael Caputo also worked for Vladimir Putin as his image consultant, or Roger Stone was in direct contact with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. So if you're going to interview him about those topics, he's obviously not going to be objective, and he's obviously going to take that opportunity to defend himself in the public sphere, which, for Trump means as much, sometimes even more than actual court. And so it blows my mind that the media continues to treat this band of criminals as objective, neutral parties, and even as admirable people, especially when the kind of policies that they've advocated for are playing out in public and involve things like ripping children away from their parents.
Yeah, and look, we find out this week that whole scheme was dreamt up even before Inauguration Day. And it's amazing to me that we still think that, this administration is just a bunch of dolts who are stumbling around doing things. The moneyed class of this country have set up entire networks of think tanks and policy networks to dream up these kind of horrible schemes. And I guess it's not surprising to me that, well, there they are, front and center on display.
Yeah, they've been working at this for a long time. There are ideologues within this administration. Are their ideas terrible? Yes. Are their ideas often, illegal, unconstitutional? Yes. Are they going to try to implement them anyway? Yes. And that was always the danger. And that was one of the most frustrating aspects of the campaign, is that Trump campaigned on these ideas. He campaigned on these platforms. He demonized immigrants. He demonized Mexicans from the very first day that he launched his campaign. He demonized anybody who basically didn't fit the sort of, Aryan youth mold. And he talked about wanting to tear families apart. He talked about wanting to hurt children. Somebody once said to him, what if like a refugee was asking you for a child refugee came to you begging for help? He's like, yeah, I'd turn him away. I mean, he was very blunt about all this. And so, as I've been saying for years, we should have expected the worst. Now I think we truly are being given one of the absolute worst things that this administration has ever done, and that's saying a lot. And people are surprised. And, there's no real point in belaboring this, the frustration with their surprise, because we need to have action. And I'm glad that people are organizing these massive protests. I'm glad that senators and others in the legislature are signing on to bills and to policies to try to stop this practice. But we already have a tremendous amount of damage that's been done to these families and to these kids. They will never truly recover from this experience, even if they are reunited with their parents, even if they are able to find some kind of sanctuary. I mean, this is absolutely brutal and traumatizing, and it's so upsetting that it's gone this far.
The key being if they're able to be reunited. And, I've been saying, are we creating the next generation of terrorists? And will there be some idiot in, 5 or 10 years to go, why do they hate us?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible we could be creating terrorists, but I think it's, more likely, and basically it's definite, we will be creating traumatized people. I know people who grew up in war zones, who grew up in dictatorships, who were separated from family, who lived as exiles, as refugees. Like, it's a deeply traumatizing experience. It's something you never really recover from. And in those people, actually, as adults, have been some of the best and most sage advice about the Trump administration, more than anyone I've known, because they know the signs of this. And they also know that there's no limit to human cruelty, that what you think are laws are just norms, and that those norms can be violated. And, through rhetoric and propaganda, cruelty within a population can be instilled. It can be fired up, and the unthinkable can come to pass and can come to hurt you directly. And so, people I know who've grown up in those circumstances take nothing for granted, and a lot of them have gone on to do great things. The best case scenario is we get something from that, but no child should ever have to endure that for any reason. There's basically nothing good that came out of this, because no child deserves what the American government is doing to them. There's no justification, and there's no forgiveness for us. This is a permanent stain on our country, in the same way that Native American genocide and slavery and Japanese internment camps are. This will be something we should always feel shame about, and that we should never practice again. But unfortunately, under this administration, it's not just likely that it's going to be again, but that it's going to get much worse.
But Sarah, Obama did it.
Obama did a lot of shitty things regarding immigration. During Obama's time in office, I was working as an expert witness in asylum cases, like for people from Central Asia, mostly Uzbeks from Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. I dealt with ICE. I've dealt with that system, with that bureaucracy. I think that Obama, helped put into place very damaging policies, and that were allowed to be exploited by people like Trump in a very effective way. But what Obama did not do was create a policy that stripped children away from their parents purposefully. He did not create a policy that took kids away from their parents as a form of punishment or as a form of deterrence. That is new. That's what the Trump administration is doing. And there are all sorts of horrifying things that can happen to you if you cross into this country as a migrant. But being purposely taken away from your parents, having guards come in and say they're giving your child a bath, and then you never see your child again, having your child ripped from your arms while you're breastfeeding it. That happened to a woman who was breastfeeding her 4-month-old daughter. The Obama administration did not do those things. And, when they did, I don't think they did it with, rapturously and happily and with this, racist agenda in mind. That was certainly not something the Obama administration was doing. And I think, we should criticize the Obama administration and acknowledge what they've done, but it is not the same. And what Trump has done and Sessions and all the others is so much worse, and it's intentional, and they plan to continue it, and it needs to be stopped.
Have you heard the audio tapes that ProPublica put out?
I can't. I mean, I'm too upset reading it. And like I said, I've served as a witness in court, often for families that worried that someone in their family would be deported, that they would never see them again. And, and I'm a mother, and it's enough for me to read it. I don't think I can listen. I can't. I don't have anything else to say, I guess, about it, because I just can't bring myself to listen to it.
No, I hear
sorry.
you. And, no, the thing that's infuriating to me is, the reporting that came along with it, that these, whatever internment guards or prison guards or whatever you're going to call them, that they're directed not to comfort the kids, to not, touch them, not help in any way, try and soothe them. To me, I don't know how you do that. And I'm sorry, just following orders doesn't make it for me.
No, I don't understand it either. I find it unfathomable. And, I've heard of people quitting because they can't take the conditions working there. And on one hand, I admire that. I admire that they're coming forward with stories that, tell us what's actually happening in these camps. But on the other hand, someone will step up and take that position and will, fulfill those horrible orders. But that's what I mean about the sadistic nature of these policies. Like, that's how it's different than what Obama's administration was doing. And, what rationale is there for not comforting a child who's in agony? Like, what rationale is there for separating siblings, or for separating parents from children? Like, there's nothing in there except, to hurt them in the most personal way, in a way that prompts a visceral reaction among every parent. And, that this hasn't been stopped already alarms me. And I'm glad that people are taking steps to do it. But, every day that passes, every hour that passes is a screaming child in agony and a mother wondering if, she'll ever see her child again. And I can't fathom that. And a father. And I can't fathom that level of pain and terror that they must be going through. It's beyond anything I can comprehend. I hope I never have to comprehend it, and they should have never had to comprehend it either.
Yeah, I'm with you. You're an expert on authoritarian regimes. This is something that they do. This is one of the telltale things that a dictator type would do to people. Does it get worse than this? I mean, Joe Biden said after the McCain comments that was rock bottom. Obviously, we've gone a lot deeper. Does it get worse than this?
No, it can get worse. But one thing that I've noticed about this, which I find both interesting and disturbing, is that, authoritarian regimes are notorious for abusing children, especially in the form of child labor. Like in Uzbekistan, for example, they would have children, as young as 5 or 6 years old, having to work in cotton fields, picking cotton all day long on behalf of the government. In Russia, they're notorious for their orphanages, where children are systematically abused and abandoned, so that they're often left with, incredible emotional and physical damage. But the countries in question hide these problems. The Human Rights Organization comes. They deny that any of this is occurring. They're adamant about it. And in the case of Uzbekistan, where basically no Western pressure could kind of get them to bend on anything, they did curb child labor. It didn't completely end, but it really did stop somewhat as a result of massive worldwide outrage and boycotts of companies that were, getting cotton from Uzbekistan, because it's a universally horrifying phenomenon. It's something that we all react to with disgust. And Trump initially was flaunting this. He wanted us to know what they were doing to these children. And the same is true of Sessions. You know, they were justifying it through Bible verses. They were proud of it. And it's only kind of in the aftermath of the backlash that they're now trying to blame it on the Democrats or deny that it's happening, which is more the kind of reaction you would expect to see in an autocracy. But the fact that they would just come out and be like, yes, we're tormenting children. We are tormenting babies. And that's the kind of government that we are. That's the kind of country that we want to be, that they would be open about that. In my mind, that means they'll do anything. And so, no, I don't think that this is the bottom. I think we're in for things that are truly horrifying, you know, things that will rival, you know, the great atrocities perpetrated in the past. And I hope it doesn't get to that. You know, I hope that there isn't ethnic cleansing. I'm wondering what's happened to a lot of these children. I'm wondering why we're only showing the boys and we're not showing what's happened, particularly given Trump's own background, given the fact that Trump has, you know, befriended numerous pedophiles and sex traffickers over his life. I'm not exaggerating here. You know, I can name the individuals in question. And I think this is all something that our officials who are investigating this should be seriously looking into. They should be demanding to see those girls and see who is looking after them. How are they being treated? Are they being protected? You know, that's something that disturbs me a great deal.
Well, there was already a case we talked about yesterday of a sheriff in Texas. I forget the county off the top of my head. You know, it was super sexual assault. I'd never seen super attached to it before. But, you know, evidently he had raped a 4-year-old and tried to blackmail the mother into not speaking. And it just, you go, this is what happens when this kind of stuff goes on. So last question I've got for you, you know, because it always comes back to, what do we do? I mean, I'm hoping that Mueller comes quickly with the investigation. If he doesn't get fired here very soon, I'm hoping that, you know, there's something that, you know, come November, we take these bums out and all of that. But in the meantime, what do we do?
I mean, the priority should be closing these camps, reuniting these families. I don't know by what means, but there needs to be constant pressure applied to officials. I mean, that's the thing is, you know, I can do so much in my own capacity. I can expose it. I can complain about it. I can talk about it, you know, same with you. But it is our legislature and our who need to actually take action. And, you know, and this is one of the things that really frustrates me about Mueller's investigation. Like, if I were him and I knew that I had extremely damning information on this administration that could potentially, you know, remove Trump from office and save the lives of babies, save the lives of children, I would try to get that out as quickly as possible. I would try to expedite this process as quickly as possible. And everyone keeps saying, you know, oh, he needs to go by the book. It needs to be perfect. And it's like, you can't go by the book when the book is burning. Like, of course it should be, you know, honest. It should be thorough. It should be legal. It should respect protocol. But it should also take into account the urgency of this situation. And when you have children being tortured in, you know, internment camps, that is an emergency situation. And so I've been saying all along, he does not have the luxury of time, and that still remains the case. And that's also true for Congress. They do not have the luxury of time, and, you know, they should not be screwing around with the lives of children and parents of migrant families. This is an emergency, and they should treat it as such.
I'm with you, but as I've been saying all week, the reality is, you know, our Congress, the Republicans have done nothing to stop the slaughter of our kids in schools. They've actively attempted to steal health insurance from children by, you know, holding the CHIP program hostage. They're literally taking food out of the mouths of kids. You know, they don't give a tinker's damn about the homeless children. So if this is how we treat our children, what makes us think that they give any care whatsoever to somebody else's or to the other children?
Right. No, I'm so glad you brought that up, and I'm glad that you tied all that together, because that is, you know, this is linked. They are attacking kids. They are purposefully hurting kids. They are letting kids die. And they have a choice. You know, they have a choice to instate these programs. They have the choice to unite these families. You know, gun massacres are harder to prevent, but of course they have the choice to have a different kind of gun policy. But what you see is, you know, apathy and sadism. You know, it depends on the individual involved, but the result is the same. And it's incredibly shameful shameful. And yes, I hope that they are voted out in November. But again, I don't have a great amount of faith that our elections will be free and fair. And I've been saying that for a year, and it's only recently that I think people kind of are, not everyone, but, mainstream media is kind of catching on to that reality, and that there isn't sort of a safe, easy way out. It's going to be a tough road. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying we need to cover all our bases and be extremely vigilant at this time. I'm with you.
Sarah, I appreciate the time. Always good talking with you. Thanks so much for your thoughts.
Oh, thank you.
As always, great stuff. Our good friend Sarah Kendzior. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
This is why we fight, why we lie awake. This is why we fight.
Finally, radio for the rest of us. Rick Smith. The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So as we've been talking about pretty much all day, what's going on down on the southern border is just an absolute disgrace. But to me, what the mainstream, corporate-controlled, conservative media has been feeding out, the propagandists, if you will, people like Tucker Carlson, is saying, and this is just one of those things that just blew my mind when I saw it. I had to read it, and then I had to see it, and then I had to read it again. He said, quote, "This is one of those moments that tells you everything about our ruling class." Our billionaires, they care more about foreigners than about their own people. And I'm going, really? Is that how you see this? Or is that what you were told to read? Is that what's banging around between those little ears? Or did someone wind that up into your little head? It's just infuriating to me to see these apologists, these propagandists. It's just crazy. And here to share some thoughts on just how far off the beaten path our media is, I've asked Andrew Lawrence to come talk with us. He's a senior researcher over at Media Matters for America. Andrew, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, yeah, no problem. I'm very glad to be here.
So the ruling elite, the ruling class, the Koch brothers, the Sheldon Adelsons, the ruling class of the country, evidently this is their fault?
Well, not just them. There's so much to talk about with Tucker Carlson, but not even the Koch brothers, Sheldon Adelson. Tucker Carlson himself, I mean, he comes from a family, his mother, I believe it's his stepmother, is the heiress to the Swanson frozen food fortune. He attended some of the most elite, privileged boarding schools in America. And then, he comes out there and he starts railing against immigration activists as elitists who just want open borders so Democrats can get more votes. It's so disingenuous, and especially coming from him. But that's nothing new with Tucker Carlson. And, just to give you and your listeners sort of an idea of what I do here, I work on the night shift here at Media Matters, so I end up in the office watching Tucker Carlson every night. And this has been, he is promoting white nationalism on Fox News at 8 o'clock every single night. And he does it in a way, he does it in a clever way where he talks about the culture, American culture. They're coming to steal your culture. He talks about MS-13 instead of talking about the kids that are being detained right now. Things like that. He decides to tie it to immigrants are going to come murder you. And that's how he justifies what's happening right now at the border. But this is, if you want to know why the conservative movement is where it is right now, just put on Tucker Carlson at 8 o'clock at night on Fox. He does it every single night.
And the thing is you look at these images coming out of these detention facilities, these internment camps, whatever you want to call them. Mm-hmm. And, you go, I'm waiting for, 10 or 15 years down the road for Tucker Carlson to turn around. And after these kids have been tortured and mistreated, and they come back for revenge, because we are, in my view, creating the next generation of terrorists by doing what they're doing. And then to have someone like Carlson say, well, gee, why do they hate us?
Right.
Well,
I mean,
hello?
can you imagine if a country ripped you away from your family at 5, 6, 7, 8, 14 years old? I mean, what would be going through your mind at that point, And the conservative media ripped Obama for that made-up apology tour that they say he went on. We are going to need an actual apology tour at the end of Trump's term, whenever that is.
Yeah, I mean, someone tweeted to me today that whoever the next president is going to have to be joining a lot of things. Because today we pulled out of the UN's Human Rights Council. And again, based on what we're doing, probably the right move.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But, like I said, this and last night with Tucker Carlson was just it was an abomination. And, he was bringing on he has this guest that he brings on a lot, Mark Steyn. This is a guy who has been on Tucker Carlson and positively cited a white supremacist propaganda novel called The Camp of the Saints, which is about how brown people are coming to destroy Europe, and is cited a lot as a favorite of white supremacists, Nazis, white nationalists, this whole crew. I mean, that happened several months ago. Mark Steyn was on later talking about how Arizona is too Hispanic and it's taking away from the American culture. This is stuff that happens every single night on Fox News. And, Bill O'Reilly was bad and Megyn Kelly was bad and they were racist and they had the whole new Black Panther thing. Bill O'Reilly said that the slaves were at least well-fed, things like that. But what's happening right now is I mean, it's scary watching this stuff happen on Fox News. The number one rated shows, when you look at Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, and Sean Hannity on cable news right now, it's disgusting what happens on there every single night, and a lot of people watch this stuff.
Yeah, but it's really about fear. I mean, I've talked about this with our producer, and is there a way that we can scare people? I go, look, the white people are coming for us. The rich white people are coming. They're coming to take your jobs and steal your children. And because look, I mean, fear sells. This stuff, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to over the past several months who they're truly afraid that MS-13 lurks around every corner.
Something they hadn't even heard of 6 months ago.
Exactly.
And you've got these people that, I mean, there's, suburbia is scared of MS-13. It's,
now let's not make it out that the actual people who make up MS-13 are decent people. I'm not saying they're good people on that side of the
but
aisle.
they're not a
You're
threat
never
to
gonna hear
you
that
or
out of
me they're not coming for you.
But they're not coming. They're not around every corner, and this is this is what they do. And you're right, masterfully. They take this little seed, this little kernel of fear, and they just explode it into everyone's mind. Like they're sitting in the living room next to you.
Right, exactly. And it's look, this is a pattern that's been happening for years. We saw it with Islamophobia after 9/11, the new Black Panthers. The list goes on and on. There's always a boogeyman around the corner that it just so happens that the boogeyman is always brown or black.
Yeah.
But like I said, Fox News has been doing it for years, but what they're doing right now is it's on another level than what they used to do.
Yeah, I mean, I look at because thank you for watching this nonsense because I can't. I can take like 5 minutes here. I can watch a clip that someone sends me, but to actually sit and consume an entire hour, just rots my brain. But you see some of the highlights or lowlights that come out, like Laura Ingraham calling them. It's basically like summer camp.
Oh my God! And this is the same day that you have reports coming out of kids being lost. There was a report today of a girl with Down syndrome that they can't even find anymore. That DHS can't even find, doesn't know where she is. And to call it a summer camp is just it's sickening. And earlier on her radio show yesterday as well, she called it hilarious. And I'm sitting here watching them, and they're going and saying that this is just a Democratic ploy to try to get votes in the midterms, that Democrats don't actually care about these issues. They're just trying to make Trump look bad and things like this. And it just shows the lack of empathy that they have for anyone other than themselves.
No, and at the end of this, my fear is that the messaging that the Republicans are throwing out, that this is a Democratic bill and the Democrats are making them do that, actually sticks. Because I've heard a bunch of people tell me that, and I'm going, whoa. take a quick step back. This stuff wasn't enforced under Bush's administration or Obama's administration, and there's no law that says children have to be taken from their parents, stripped from their mothers and fathers, and held in a cage like animals. There's no law that says that. Find me that somewhere in writing that says we have to rip these children from their families and hold them like animals in pens.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, look, let's be honest. I was not happy with the way that Obama handled immigration at all. But this is worse. I mean, and going back, what was it, a month ago that Trump used the term animals? And, what was it, a week that we had all these journalists saying, well, he was actually talking about the gangs. He wasn't talking about the actual immigrants that are coming in. And now we've got pictures coming out of these children in kennels being treated like animals. That tweet today where he said that they're coming in to infest America. I mean, this is white supremacist language coming from the president of the United States.
No, I mean, and when I saw that, the first thing I'm thinking is, do you not know that immigrants actually built this country? I'm from a family of immigrants. Granted, it's been a while, but they came here from somewhere else too.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, these people are coming here to escape horrors in their countries. And I think a real misconception that's happening out there, and you and I talked about it a little bit earlier, was most of these people are coming from Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. They're not Mexicans. They're certainly not gang members. They're trying to escape the violence that's happening, and they're trying to create a better life for them and their families. And we need to treat people like they're actually people, and we're not. It's kind of sick what's happening right now. It's really upsetting.
Yeah, but you hear the stories, and I've read a number of stories of these folks from Honduras or El Salvador, or Guatemala, or wherever, coming here and trying to come the right way, trying to come through the main port there, through the main area, and then being turned away and left without food or water or anything. And then you go, but hey, we're seeking asylum. There are international laws that we've signed on to, that we helped put into place, that ensure that people get treated with some bit of dignity and not treated like criminals or forced into a situation where they now have to make a decision of, hey, do we go in illegally? Do we go in a different way other than trying to come in through the front door? That's what this administration has put forth.
Absolutely. And I mean, you even play it out, a little bit longer, and let's just say Trump does right now immediately reverse this. Excuse me. Do you have any faith that this administration would be able to reunite these 3,000 kids with their families? I mean, no. It's such a disaster. It's so heartbreaking and so sad. And I don't know. Lord only knows what's going to happen moving forward.
Yeah, have you heard the audio? The ProPublica came out and did a piece, I believe it was yesterday or the day before, where they had audio from inside of one of the detention centers of just kids just wailing. And, one of the guards saying, it's like an orchestra without a composer. And you go, really? You cold, heartless FCC rules?
How do they sleep at night?
FCC rules prohibit me from going any further into my thoughts of this person. But, it's remarkable to me. Then you hear stories that they're not supposed to pick these kids up or comfort them in any way. And you go, really? What kind of damage are we doing to these kids into the future? And these are the people who tell us that they're the party of family values. These are the people who tell us how much they love the children and they want them brought into the world. And I got to be honest, there's part of me that goes, maybe these people are so deep into misery porn that they want to see poor people just abused and terrorized. And that's why they're against abortion, not because they care if people are born or not, just because they love the misery. Right.
Right. And, I know that you have kids, and I don't know if you've ever lost your kid even for a minute in a grocery store. But the panic that comes with just not being able to find your child after a minute, let alone, there's stories of parents being sent back home to Guatemala and their kids being left here.
Yeah, it's unimaginable.
What are we doing?
No, I thought about that. On Father's Day, I was, I was thinking about it because my wife and kids were on vacation down at my father-in-law's for a couple of weeks and down in South Carolina, and just having them gone for the day, I was sad. My kids aren't here, and it's one of those things. And I started thinking about it. What would I do if someone kicked in the door and took them away, or we went to cross state borders and a bunch of thugs came and took the kids away. And then to find out what kind of conditions they would be held in, what would you do? Where would you go? What could you be capable of?
And keep in mind that these are the people that claim to advocate for small government as well. And think about when they talk about the government coming to, they need their guns because there might be tyranny. And now. What, like they're happy with the government kicking in doors and taking children away from their parents?
Well, I got to be honest with you. There's part of me that goes, you know what? Maybe we all do need guns. Look what the government's doing to families.
Yeah.
And if they're doing it to their families, how long before it turns around and does it to ours?
I'm really surprised that it's gotten this far. And I shouldn't be, but I am.
And the other thing that gets me is, there must be a booming industry for crisis actors.
Oh, God. I'm assuming you're talking about the amazing Ann Coulter on Fox News.
I try not to say her name out loud because it's evil, bad things could happen.
Right? Yeah, she'll appear if you say it 3 times. But she's saying that these children, these crying children, are crisis actors. And she's saying this, on Fox News, which, whatever, not that big of a deal, but the president watches this stuff and he listens to it and he forms policy off of it. And Ann Coulter helped him write his original immigration policy during the campaign. These are people that have the president, the most powerful man in the world's ear. And he listens to them and does what they tell him to.
There's nobody that I want to see subjected to the kind of treatment that we're putting these kids through. But... there are times when you stop and you think about some of that stuff and you go, well, there are some who might deserve it.
It's crazy. Just what's happening right now. It's so depressing and so upsetting. And, I know that there's a march scheduled for June 30th. I don't know if we can make it another 12 days of this. I mean, imagine those kids another 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it's another one of these, as I said right from the start, when this first broke, I said, this is going to be one of those things that our grandchildren are going to look at us and look back on us and go, what was wrong with you? Much like we do to the World War II generation for the Japanese internment camps. We are reliving the bad side of our history. And it's because of people like Trump and Sessions and all of these talking heads over at Fake News. I shudder to think what would have happened if we'd have had a larger version of Father Coughlin, a Fox News back in the 40s. Back where would we be as a country? Just scary stuff. Last question I've got for you. I look at this stuff, and at some point, is this not a call for the left, for Democrats, for sane, rational people to create an environment, to create an infrastructure to counter some of this stuff? I mean, because, Fox News, the conservative media, they have grown so powerful that they're driving policy. They're driving, the public's opinion. Because I can't tell you how many people have told me they're just spewing Fox News talking points without even thinking about what they're saying.
Oh, absolutely. And it's, what's so interesting, because like I said, I do watch Fox News. I watch all of this stuff every single night. And Fox News spends at least 20% of their programming attacking MSNBC, CNN, and other mainstream media outlets. And the mainstream media outlets are so scared to go after Fox News that they won't call them out on this stuff. And I think that creates the environment where they just get away with it and get away with it and get away with it. And there needs to be some sort of liberal, progressive version of Fox News that actually attacks these people every single day, every single segment.
If for nothing else, just to point out that the fact that they'd lie when the truth would be better.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing on the left like Fox News for the right.
And it is one of the failures of the movement and of the Democratic Party, in my view. But Andrew, I appreciate you sharing some of your thoughts. Thank you for watching all that stuff, so we don't have to. Good on you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun.
Good stuff. Andrew Lawrence, senior researcher there at Media Matters for America. Let's take a quick break. Back with your thoughts right after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Director of AFSCME, Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. A union of over 1.4 million strong and growing, AFSCME is gaining improvements in the workplace all across America. And right here in the Commonwealth, more than 95,000 AFSCME members make Pennsylvania happen. Highways, libraries, hospitals, parks, offices, prisons, classrooms, museums, courtrooms. You'll find AFSCME members at work in all these places and many more.
I make Pennsylvania happen every day.
I make Pennsylvania happen every day.
Today's AFSCME members take on public service jobs as diverse as they are, not for the recognition, but for a better Pennsylvania. For more information, please visit our website at AFSCME13.org. Labor is changing, so is your labor union. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happen!
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So the big news of the day, at least, one of the things I just, I don't know if it's news, judging what we're doing on the southern border, but the U.S. is pulling out of the UN Human Rights Council. And, you just go, are we surprised by it with this administration? I'm not anyway. And here to talk a little bit about that and all the other things we can get to, our good friend Luke Vargas, chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News, fresh back off of his Singapore trip. And he joins us from New York. Luke, thanks for taking time for us.
You're very welcome. Glad to be with you.
So let's start with that. How was the trip?
It was great. All things considered, one of those trips where unfortunately I'm not with the people, out in, I don't know, it's not one of those trips I used to have during the Obama years where it's like we cared about refugees and I knew that if I went and followed an issue on the ground and wanted to make sure I had airtime for it, like our hosts were open and the audience was engaged and we cared about the work. Now, if I went overseas to anything but a summit where Trump is making sure it's going to be the headline story, it's almost too risky to take a gamble on, I could go to Nicaragua now, but am I going to be able to convince Americans to care about that? If I could go to all these other places, it's the news planning is very difficult. So, but all things considered, even though it was one of those trips where I'm mostly at press conferences and in filing centers, it was still pretty amazing to kind of see it all firsthand. And I still feel like I was able to bring a little critical analysis to bear, all things considered.
Now, I'm guardedly hopeful. Maybe something positive comes out of it. I think it was all just a big show. I don't know what we got for the display other than, to say it was historic and, you've opened the door and all of that. I'm still, while not a Trump supporter or someone who believes that he's, any good at negotiating, I'm still hopeful.
Yeah, I guess to take us right to the North Korea story, and we can put that to bed immediately afterwards. I mean, we've seen in the last day or so Kim Jong-un going to Beijing. This is the third time now that he's gone to China in 3 months, which if we were under any illusion that because China wasn't at the negotiating table in Singapore, they weren't involved in the process, this has put that notion, is quieted that line of thinking, right? I mean, this is a pretty clear sign that Kim is seeking guidance from Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, some sort of assurance we're led to believe that if the North Koreans pursue any sort of denuclearization as a part of a deal with the U.S., that China is going to sign on to some sanctions relief. And I think judging by what I've seen from Chinese state media since Singapore, there's reason to believe that's exactly what the Chinese are going to do. There continue to be, as we've discussed, major disagreements between the U.S. and North Korea about what was agreed to last week, right? The North Koreans think they signed on to some deal where they're going to slowly dismantle their nuclear program, and the U.S. is going to kind of incentivize them step by step, whereas North Korea thinks that, or the U.S. thinks that, they're going to denuclearize fully, and maybe even, according to President Trump, do some things on human rights, and if and only then will they get some relief. And I think North Korea, by going to China, has probably obtained some sort of agreement from the Chinese to do what North Korea wants, that even if the U.S. holds to this demand of kind of all or nothing denuclearization, that China will loosen the screws incrementally, and that's going to seriously undercut the U.S., right? Because Trump's maximum pressure is kind of an illusion if it lacks any Chinese buy-in. So again, this is, this is the relationship that I think matters ultimately the most. And it was quite telling to look at those photos of Kim in Beijing. I mean, it's set up, these photo ops, unlike his past two visits, are set up to almost exactly mirror, if not upstage, some of the visual symbolism coming out of Singapore. To me, that was a conscious move by the Chinese to show they're in charge.
Yeah, no, and I don't think anybody who's thoughtful on this issue doesn't already know that the Chinese are involved and in charge. And to be honest, I know with the closed door meeting, who knows what Trump actually agreed to?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think what's another further proof, a bit of proof that China is in the driver's seat here, is that North Korea wasn't arguing for an end to U.S. military exercises as their primary sort of the concession that they would win in talks with the U.S. They had always talked about sanctions relief and vaguely kind of about the fact that they wanted U.S. aggression to end. But until Kim visited China for the second time last month, and he went to this port city, Dalian, and it's there that North Korea makes this major shift, and they start asking for security assurances in Singapore, which exactly mirror what China has long been, requesting from the United States. Again, to me, that signals that these visits, we may not understand their full significance until several weeks after, but every time they occur, they seem to be leaving a large impression on North Korean foreign policy and shifting it again back towards Beijing.
Yeah, well, again, I'm not thrilled with who we've got on our side of the table.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of worried about that. But you brought up human rights, and today the announcement, evidently we're pulling out of the Human Rights Council, and I guess should we even be in it given what's going on right now on the southern border?
Well, I will say there are countries with much worse records on human rights than the United States
Certainly.
that have seats on the Human Rights Council. So and considering the good work that the U.S. has done on the UN Human Rights Council through the years, setting up formal inquiries into the human rights situation in North Korea, helping to investigate crimes in South Sudan, in the Congo, in Sri Lanka, and other places, helping to enshrine LGBT rights into the international human rights legal framework. I mean, these are important things we've done in the past, and we had a checkered human rights record when we did some of those things, but I guess we could say we were glad the U.S. could cast votes that did those things at the time. Nikki Haley's argument here, and this is not a threat that came out of nowhere. This has been a U.S., the Trump administration has been warning of a possible pullout from the Human Rights Council since inauguration. Nikki Haley today saying, look, it's because, this continual insistence on calling out Israeli behavior. Israel is the only country or, target country with a recurring agenda item on the Security Council schedule, which I do think is warranted. There are other countries that either should get permanent agenda items or Israel should just be taken off and you should consider them when it's necessary. So it is a flawed institution and it's got some nasty members with, membership on there. That said, though, this notion, this logic undergirding this decision on the part of the U.S. here is really characterizes a lot of what the Trump administration has been doing, right? It's this whole, we're going to threaten to leave. And when that doesn't change anybody's minds and get them to do their policy moves first, we, say bye-bye and hope everyone misses us so much that they then reform better in our absence. And, I take issue with that strategy in the worst of times, like right now. I think in a good situation where the U.S. was actually making friendship and partnership with us beneficial and setting a great model for the rest of the world, that actually were the U.S. to sort of threaten to back out, we actually might be more successful in convincing other countries to do it. I mean, but the tool the Trump administration has used to try and get countries to change the Human Rights Council, to get countries to change the Iran deal, to modify the Paris Agreement, has been coercion, right? That, hey, you know, we're going to sanction you if you don't do this. We're going to withdraw. I mean, there's just nothing that the U.S. is offering at the UN these days that would make a country want to, you know, throw someone else under the bus on our behalf. And so I think the logic here I take issue with. And I will say it's also opposite of the way we view the UN Security Council. You know, some people have asked me today, if we're pulling out of the Human Rights Council and we've got Bolton in there, why don't we just like withdraw from the UN altogether? And I would say the U.S. is well aware that were we to do that on the Human Rights Council and give up our veto power, Israel would be screwed. I mean, they would be referred to the International Criminal Court by week's end, you know, for some sort of international probes, or they'd be sanctioned for handling of the Palestine situation. And we maintain our membership on that council because it has power, and we can use our membership as the oddball out to protect them. But because the Human Rights Council lacks those strong powers, I mean, we would not be leaving the council if doing this actually put Israel at risk. And so it's a little bit of an oddity.
Yeah, and it's when I saw it, I'm thinking it was just for show because you're right. They didn't just pull completely out of the entire institution. It's just this one thing. But again, I look at what we're doing, and you're right. I mean, there are countries much worse, but we're supposed to be that example. You know, we're the ones that say, "Hey, look at us." And I got to be honest, looking at us right now, based on what's going on the southern border, I'm not all that proud and not all that willing to say, "Hey, look at us."
Yeah, I don't know who it was who tried to sort of invert Americans' perspective of all the stuff we're witnessing and say, "Hey, you know those times when, you know, in past years of American history, you know, there's been a country with a really erratic government that's doing terrible things, and the U.S. presidents in years past would say, I don't know, to the people of, I'm just going to make up a country, Georgia or something like that, you know, we condemn your government, but we don't want to punish you. That, you know, you're not the problem here. It's your elected leader." And, you know, it takes a perspective change for a moment to realize that is what every other country basically is doing to us right now. I mean, they are, in some cases, explicitly saying that. The French have been saying that, you know, like, if you're a climate scientist, come to France. If the Chinese are even sort of saying it with a huge grain of salt, like, if you want a free trade, you know, come to China. Of course, that's not accurate, but it is amazing to take a step back out of the political heat and realize that we are being treated like those, you know, crackpot regimes the U.S. had to delicately manage around the world in the past. Now we're in that position. It's an odd thing to witness.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, you know, just the other couple of days ago, I tweeted out that do you remember when we used to look at other countries and go, how could you be so stupid following a fascist dictator? How could you be so naive and follow, you know, our leadership that would snatch children from their parents? Do you remember when we used to say, how could they be so stupid to follow a government like that? And yet here we are in this weird kind of upside down world that I hope some sanity comes around. So as we're seeing what's going on the southern border, there is pressure mounting as the administration. I mean, you got all the first ladies coming out and saying that this is wrong. Even Melania Trump is saying that this is wrong. Anything that the administration is going to do, or we're not apologizing?
I think we could see some changes over the next few weeks. But one thing I wouldn't expect to change is Trump's tone here, right? We have all this evidence that immigration is the issue that he's going to be leading the charge on during the midterms. It's the same as the case with the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee and the Congressional Campaign Committee. I mean, they are basically encouraging Republicans seeking re-election or looking to upset Democrats all over the country to try and tie illegal immigration to increased risks of crime or welfare abuse to things which there is no correlation to prove, actually the opposite. In case, you know, I just listen to almost any radio station these days, and I'm hearing in blue states and red states, certain Republicans running for Congress picking up the very false assertions, you know, tying migration with MS-13 and making it seem like, you know, Latino immigrants in the U.S. are all gang members. I mean, this is exactly what Trump and Republicans believe is going to be their winning issue in the midterms. And listening to Trump today, with his administration, or at least his spokesperson, facing probably the most intense public pressure to date to show at least a modicum of, decency on this issue, he digs in, right? And he says, he calls, people entering the U.S. illegally pests. And it makes it pretty clear, I think, as if we need more proof, he's not going to back down on this. And I don't see a lot of legal remedies either, trying to survey, the courts, the court of public opinion. I don't see that being an avenue here. Congress, though, Rick, I think is where there's a chance we see something happen. There's a Senate bill called the Keep Families Together Act, which would stop the family separation policy. And it's now got support from every Democrat in the Senate, but 0 Republican. And that means it will go nowhere. I mean, right. I do think this is an issue where there's a possible bipartisan breakthrough, at least even a minor one where a few Republicans go to one side or Democrats hop over the fence. But once you've got a bill get the entirety of a caucus, it can't become bipartisan. It's too partisan to begin with. And so I would guess here that what Mitch McConnell is going to do over the next few weeks is look at these bills coming from Senate Republicans, particularly those in Texas, because I think we've got Cornyn and Ted Cruz coming up with bills of their own that would halt the family separations. But my guess is McConnell, who's been loath to vote on anything related to immigration so far, is going to wait to pick a bill that forces Democrats to do something that really undermines their own immigration principles, which is to say, I don't know, fund the border wall. I forget, it was Adam Schiff who said, Republicans or Trump wants to use the tears of these immigrant children as the mortar to build the border wall. And I think that's probably not inaccurate, that McConnell will not make it a standalone bill where everyone can join together and stand behind immigrants and how much they're victimized here. Instead, he will force Democrats to vote against this and try and call them out for being to blame here. That's a very cynical take, but I don't really see this going any other way in the current climate.
And our recent history has shown that to be the case. I mean, this is sadly how the game is played. And as you're going through this, my mind is going to the place of going, this is where sane and rational people hate the political system. Because we have a problem. I'm of the mindset we have a problem. Let's fix it. How do we get to the best fix possible instead of seeing it as an opportunity to gorge the other person, to gourd the other person in public? I just it's one of those things, man.
Yeah, I wish there were some silver lining here. I mean, it is abundantly clear that these children are being used as a partisan political pawn. But it's sad that, at least to someone like me, who my job really, I can only cut through the clutter if I identify patterns of behavior and call them out as soon as I see them, as opposed to trying to reason through them with fresh eyes every single time. I mean, this is clear. My cynicism is dialed so high up that you can spot this manipulation from a mile off, and that's sad.
I'm with you. And finally, a new UN report out answering the question, are we safer or less safe as a globe in recent decades? Where are we?
Unfortunately, things are worse, and it's too bad, because when I was studying, I was in college, several years ago, and I took a lot of courses on Africa and parts of the developing world, and that curriculum in many ways had this sort of very pleasant foundation to it, which is that, despite everything you've heard that, Africa is some den of conflict and everyone's embroiled in civil war, in fact, things are much better than they were decades ago. But if you pull back to a global view now, the evidence is clear. According to the UN now, the number of countries involved in violent conflicts is at its highest point in 30 years. The number of people dying in those conflicts has increased tenfold since 2005, and we are now at a record number of refugees in the world. And, on the refugee front, we've, of course, been dealing with Syria. As Ellen Ratner will tell you, South Sudan has been a big problem for years, Congo, and, of course, Myanmar exploded last year, Yemen. And so, this dream we had of an ever safer, ever calmer world has obviously failed to materialize. And, of course, as you've covered with many of your great guests, this decline in democracy is continuing. And I will add, finally, that the media interest in these conflicts, especially in the U.S., has trickled to a halt. I mean, I used to travel all the time and I sort of said this at the beginning, during the Obama administration, to places like Jordan and Turkey and the Balkans and Europe and covered refugee issues and the nuance of all these conflicts. And because I knew there was going to be some forum the U.S. would attend or fundraising conference, or even, we had just a State Department and a White House that spoke out about these issues. And I could guarantee there would be a news peg back in the U.S. And if I was going to talk about details of refugee camps, you and my other, partners in radio would meet me at my level, and we would work through the complexities of the world together. And I just find that as our focus in the U.S. shifts inward, there's just less interest in all of these conflicts. And I think that means, unfortunately, less appetite to stop them or and try to clean them up. And so I think these trends that the UN has identified here are unfortunately going to continue until that changes here at home.
Well, and look, the profiteers, they couldn't probably be happier. More people to sell guns to.
Yeah, no, I noted that as President Trump announced, what is it, the 10 millionth patent or something that the U.S. government approved today? It was a Raytheon patent for some sort of laser guidance system. It's not like some, child's rocking chair or something. It's a weapon of war is what the U.S. is in the business of giving patents to and making $1 billion off of when we have the chance. It's not a positive thing to be fueling when the trends look this bad.
Sad stuff. But hey, thanks for all the bright and cheery news.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Our good friend Luke Vargas. Thanks so much, Luke.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Where do you follow that up? I mean, honestly, it's that. Wow. Just amazing. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people. Come to talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1953. That was the day 26,000 members of the ILWU in Hawaii walked off the job. Their strike was a 4-day protest against the witch hunt convictions of the Hawaii Seven. Many docks and plantations immediately shut down. Stevedores refused to load military cargo headed to the war in Korea. At the height of the McCarthyite Red Scare, Union militants continued to be the primary targets of anti-communist hysteria. Longshoreman leader Jack Hall and 6 co-defendants had just been tried and convicted under the Smith Act. The ILWU denounced the trial and verdict as a frame-up. It was the ultimate move to bust the increasingly powerful union on the islands. The ILWU had come under heightened surveillance after successfully organizing stevedores and many sugar and pineapple plantations. The real trouble began after a long and bitter dock strike in 1949. Then Nebraska Senator Hugh Butler proclaimed the island to be firmly in the grips of a communist attack. HUAC arrived the next year to investigate the Red situation. In August 1951, the FBI conducted early morning raids to arrest the 7 on charges of violating the Smith Act. The arrests came as the ILWU threatened a sugar strike, having reached an impasse in contract negotiations. During the trial, it was clear the 7 were being tried not for anything they did, but for allegedly being part of a vast and secret conspiracy. The proceedings had the quality of a show trial, designed more to terrorize the public and labor movement than to prosecute any actual crime. Their convictions were finally overturned with the landmark 1957 Yates decision, which rendered much of the Smith Act unenforceable. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com. So at least we have a name for the places where they're holding these young kids. The AP reported today, Trump administration officials have been sending babies and other young children forcibly separated from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border to at least 3 tender age shelters in South Texas. I guess tender age is now the word that we're using for young kids. And I got to be honest, going back to what Sarah said about the possibility of these kids maybe being sold off, or who knows? Who knows? That just leads a whole. Goes on to say lawyers and medical providers who have visited the Rio Grande Valley shelters describe the playrooms of crying preschool-aged children in crisis. The government also plans to open a fourth shelter to house hundreds of young migrant children in Houston, where city leaders denounced the move today. Since the White House announced its zero-tolerance policy in early May, more than 2,300 children have been taken from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border, resulting in a new influx of young children requiring government care. 2,300. And you see McClatchy's now reporting that we may have lost more than 7,000 because who knows where they ended up. Our tracking is lacking. The report goes on to say Stephen Wagner, an official with the Department of Health and Human Services, said, quote, we have specialized facilities that are devoted to providing care for children with special needs and tender age children. Really? Yeah, you've thought this, you've got them in place, which, kind of blows that, we just kind of thought this up, if that's true. Now, the reports that I've seen, I would strenuously push back on the assertion that they have any of these facilities available for these kids. It's just nuts. The story also goes on to say officials from both law enforcement and Health and Human Services said they didn't know how many children were under 5. They didn't know how many children were under 2, or even so little that they were nonverbal. So we don't even know what the children that they're holding are. And I got to be honest, I look at this and as a parent, it's one of these things where it leaves you almost in a moment of being so angry that you're speechless. And I want to believe this isn't who we are. I want to believe that we're better than this. The richest country in the world, the richest country in the history of civilization, at its wealthiest point in history, we should be doing better than this. Just kind of throwing that out there. And again, this is the failure of decades of playing political football with this issue and not actually doing anything. Because it's almost like it's gotten to be such a good political issue that it drives people to the polls. That's all that our politicians are thinking about. How do we use this to our advantage? How do we use this to get what we want? You got Trump going, hey, I want my $25 billion. I want my money. Angering and crazy. And what's interesting to me, and I guess frightening, is the number of people on our Twitter feed and throwing out comments. Wow, this is all Mexico's fault. When you realize that the majority of the folks that are coming here are El Salvadorian or Honduran or from Guatemala or places like that. Some from Mexico, but most from those other countries. I know Mexico should have built a wall on their border so nobody could get through there. Scary, angering, frustrating, all of that stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, going to come back to Pennsylvania, our General Assembly pushing more of the no rights at work agenda. I know this is a huge shift, but this is really, really important. This is one of those things that I've talked about for quite some time. On the national level, you got Rand Paul and his push for a national right to work law. You're seeing all across the country. You're seeing, just assault after assault on labor. Kentucky being another place where their governor is going after workers' rights. You're looking at the Janus case, probably next Monday coming down here in Pennsylvania. A lot of stuff, banging around in the halls of our General Assembly to where come November. And I keep saying, November is really important because if Tom Wolf is not reelected as governor, bad things will happen. And a lot of them on the workers' front. As Scott Wagner has been very honest and very clear about what he'll do. Pennsylvania will be a right-to-work state faster. I would argue faster than Kentucky was. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk with John Frommer about these pieces of legislation banging around and get some of his thoughts. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
7, yeah, and I'll go to work at night. I got no time for living, yes, I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
If you inject a stream of raw ignorance into a vat of gaseous arrogance, then jolt the mixture with 1,000 megawatts of malevolence, what does it produce? Answer: Donald Trump's executive order of April 12th. King Donald I has been in a deep pout over negative articles about him in the Washington Post newspaper, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, king of the Amazon.com empire. King Trump fired off several rounds of angry tweets assailing King Bezos, including a potshot claiming that Amazon is, quote, ripping off the post office by underpaying for the millions of its packages the Postal Service ships. Tweets aside, Trump has the firepower of the federal government at his fingertips, so he's now arrogantly using the government to escalate his personal spat with Bezos. By executive order, he set up a federal task force to conduct a pernicious political inquisition into, quote, our money-losing post office, particularly looking at the, quote, pricing of the package delivery market. This reflects Trump's vast ignorance. Far from being a money loser, the U.S. Postal Service has actually been earning about $1 billion a year in profit. His false claim of unsustainable postal losses stems from a 2006 political ploy by right-wingers who want to destroy the public service. They passed a law dictating that USPS pre-fund retiree health benefits 75 years into the future, covering benefit costs for workers who haven't even been born, much less hired and retired. This adds a totally hokey expense of up to $5 billion a year to the USPS corporate ledger, creating the fake loss Trump is now so bombastically citing as the rationale for his destructive inquisition. This is Jim Hightower saying, sometimes public policy inadvertently turns bad, but when it's based on ignorance and arrogance, policy inevitably goes bad.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thought are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
Working hard to make a left, bring shit of robbery. Father, son, left to carry on, blue denim, and his vein. He's a working class man.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, ricksmithshow.com. So as I said in the last segment, the hat trick of horrible is banging around the General Assembly here in Pennsylvania. And it's not new. I mean, this is the same kind of stuff that's gone on in other states to attempt to push the no rights at work agenda. And on the workers' compensation front, certainly not an issue that compares with what's going on our southern border. But it's still one of these issues that every working person in the Commonwealth and every person across the country should most certainly care about. And that's why I've asked John Frommer to come talk with us. He's a partner with Frommer D'Amico law firm here in Pennsylvania. John, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, thanks for having me. I enjoy your show.
Thanks so much. So I'm looking at this again. The horrible never seems to go away. The bad ideas that the Scott Wagners and then the Terzais and their ilk keep pushing never seem to go away. But there are three right now that are are rather horrible going on right now, right?
There is actually 4, but the 3 that are the biggies are going on right now. We removed one, probably the biggest threat, through a close vote and a thankful veto by Governor Wolf back on April 27. So the drug formulary game was taken off the table by Governor Wolf through a veto. That's not going to go away. That's going to stick around for another election cycle. So not to make any comments on election cycles, but we may want to keep Governor Wolf in office if you've got an interest in avoiding the insurance companies taking over your prescription drug formularies.
Well, as I've been saying, look, come November, if Wolf isn't reelected, bad things will happen, and this could be one of them. But explain what this is. I mean, because this is one of these issues that I love to chide my right wing friends of keep the government between me and my doctor. This is one of those weird little scenarios that puts bad policy right between me and my doctor.
Well, I think you're right. My take on the drug formulary proposal legislation that was vetoed by Governor Wolf back in April was that it was an opportunity seized by those that saw the opportunity as a result of the opioid crisis. And I am certainly not here to play down the opioid crisis. We've got a national problem on our hands. There is movement by the federal government and all the states to address it. But workers' compensation and injured workers are a small, tiny fraction of the opioid crisis problem. That said, with the cover of the opioid crisis, what the legislature did with their proposal was to say, for the workers' compensation world, again, a small percentage, whose prescription drugs are covered by workers' compensation insurance and whose prescriptions are dictated through the Workers' Compensation Act, the legislative act governing workers' comp, we're going to step in and say, hey, with this opioid crisis, one of the things we're going to do to try to fix the opioid crisis is to create a drug formulary, basically saying, here are the drugs that you, if you're injured at work, can get from your doctor. Now, you and your doctor your doctor doesn't get to decide which drugs he's going to prescribe or she's going to prescribe or why. They are going to be limited legislatively to a formula, a list of approved drugs. And from those approved drugs, they may approve them, and those are the drugs that workers' comp insurance will pay for. And if the doctor wants to depart from that list, he or she is going to need to show some really good reason, go through a lot of administrative gobbledygook to try to get you the drugs that your doctor feels you do need for your work injury. That was, from my perspective, just sheer opportunism. It was an opportunity to take the opioid crisis and seize on it as a way to, again, look for cost cutting, benefit cutting to the injured workers in the injured worker arena.
And that's what I was going to ask. Who comes up with this list? What's the criteria for the list?
My gosh, there are medical groups and insurance groups across the country that work together. There are other states that have passed these formulas. It's basically like going to a restaurant where there's only so many things on the menu. But the answer is that there are different origins for different formularies. Different states use different systems. But suffice it to say, Rick, that it's a set list of your doctor can choose from these things, and there are medications, not only opioids, but other medications that are going to be left off the list because the powers that be, not your doctor, decide they're not necessary. So in any event, that effort at pushing through formularies as a one, effort to address the opioid crisis, but really two, reduce the cost for insurance companies, presumably for workers' comp coverage, failed as a result of Governor Wolf's veto in April. So that's item number one on the hit parade of your trifecta. It's
Right.
no longer on the table, but let's not forget it's looming.
Right. So let me ask you, do we have House numbers? Do we have bill numbers? So when people call their representatives, they can go, no, we're not pushing this through. Stop this. Anything
It's
like that?
Senate Bill 1052 and House Bill 1840.
All righty. We'll make sure we get a note of that.
I'm sorry, Senate Bill 936. Got it. Apologize for the mistake.
All right, we'll make sure we get that out. So let's move on. Now, there's some other bad stuff going on because it never seems to end. What's the next piece you got for us?
Well, it's all cost cutting. It's all cost cutting.
Oh, no, John, it's reform. We're reforming the system. We're taking money out of it so it works better.
It's reform. It's cost cutting. So item number 2 on the hit parade is the reconstitution of the impairment rating evaluation guidelines. I could get into the thick of it.
Yeah, don't.
But suffice it to say that there was a tool available in the workers' compensation insurance company toolbox that enabled them to place a cap on the length of time that a seriously injured worker could receive wage loss benefits. They could ask for and receive an impairment rating evaluation from a doctor, from a group of doctors that do them, and if their work-related impairment was under a certain percentage, regardless of whether they could return to work, their wage loss benefits were capped or limited. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, a year ago, back in June of 2017, declared the entire section of the Workers' Compensation Act that had been amended back in 1996 to include this tool available to insurance companies. 96 was back in the Ridge administration, where you were dealing with major amendments to the Workers' Compensation Act in order to make Pennsylvania more business friendly, aka reduce premiums for insurance companies,
AKA screw workers.
Okay.
No, because I remember 96.
No,
I remember.
You're a straight talker. I'm not going to disagree.
Look, I remember 96. I remember this whole deform. I remember telling my union buddies, you got to be calling your representatives. This is a complete departure from the grand bargain that workers' compensation was.
Agreed.
That you would be taken care of in the time that you were injured, so that you wouldn't have to sue your employer. But yet here we are. You got a 500-week maximum at a time where the employer, you still can't go and sue them. But in 500 weeks, which is about 9.5 years, you're SOL. You're out on the street, and your employer goes next.
So the legislature, when they wrote that legislation and passed it in 96 to enable for these impairment ratings, they made a boo-boo. They wrote into the legislation that these impairment ratings would be subject to the American Medical Association guidelines in any given year as the guidelines changed from the 96 guidelines to the 98 guidelines to the 2005 guidelines and so as the AMA's impairment rating guidelines changed, so too did the standard by which an injured worker would be deemed impaired and the percentage of impairment. And essentially what the Supreme Court said was, that is an unconstitutional delegation of authority to decide how and when an injured worker's impairment is going to be by saying we're going to allow the AMA to decide what the standard's going to be. And what's going on, Rick, is it was declared unconstitutional because you can't delegate that kind of authority. The legislature's got to fix it. Here's the test. Here's the standard, and it needs to stay the standard unless there's a legislative amendment. The legislature's going to go back, and they're in the process of going back and saying, all right, we're going to pick the 2016 AMA guideline, and that'll be it. And unless we amend the statute, that will be basis for evaluating an injured worker and putting them back on a 500-week clock, and that'll fix the unconstitutional argument. And I think it's going to ultimately push through unless we get some election help, but that's out there. That's the IRE bill that's pending, and that is, bear with me as I look at it, it's, here we go.
As you look for this, the thing that gets me is,
House Bill 1840. I'm sorry. There you go.
That's
the change in prods. Okay.
So
that's
I look at
item
this.
number 2 on the trifecta.
Right. So I look at this, and the first question that I come up with is, who came up with 500 weeks, and how is that fair to someone who's injured? I've known people throughout the years who their lives are upended, and I'm sorry, 9.5 years is not. Is not going to get you through to retirement. And in fact, there are no cost of living adjustments on workers' compensation. So, inflation erodes whatever payments you get. And you end up having someone who had the misfortune of going to work and being harmed on the job, then ending up in poverty in a couple of years, or the way this is in 9.5 years, left out in the cold, begging for Social Security or welfare.
Separate and aside from any legislative action pending, you hit the nail on the head. Your thinking, forward as it is head on. And I'll share with you that one of the biggest tragedies of Pennsylvania's Workers' Comp Act and many, many other states' workers, when Workers' Comp was passed, medical insurance was a spit in the bucket as an employee benefit. And today, when an injured worker is hurt at work, they may well have taken a lower paying job in order to have family medical insurance coverage. Then they're hurt at work. They're not unionized, so they have no protection. Their job is not protected by a collective bargaining agreement. They're hurt at work. Their wife, their kids, themselves, covered by their work insurance package. They herniate a lumbar disc, tear a rotator cuff, blow out a knee. They end up at the age of 40 undergoing a surgery. And within a month or 2 or 3 in our at-will state, they're getting their workers' comp coverage, they're getting their 2/3 of their wage, and they're getting their work-related injury covered by workers' comp, but they receive notice from their employer, your health insurance coverage is being terminated. If you wish to continue it, it will cost you $600, $700, $800, $1,000 a month to continue on your health insurance, because health insurance isn't protected or covered by workers' comp. And they go under like the Titanic as a result of that kind of catastrophic loss.
And I'm sure you see this stuff, these horrible scenarios all the time.
The spouse dealing with diabetes who's insulin dependent, boom, no more health insurance for the injured worker while they're out on workers' comp. So that's not even... That's a legislative reform that I'm wishing to see someday, but I'm going to be holding my breath for that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. And the final, and the third, the third in the hat trick, what do we got?
The uninsured employer guarantee fund. Quickly, a fund created by the Commonwealth to deal with the situation when the employer you're working for, doesn't have any workers' comp insurance. They're violating the law, just like you and I would be violating the law when we fail to have auto insurance and are driving out there uninsured. Employers are required to have workers' comp insurance, and your employer doesn't. Well, the state stepped in and said, okay, if that happens, through a funding mechanism where all the different insurance companies will pay a portion of their premiums into a fund, so that if your employer happens to be a crook and doesn't have workers' comp insurance, you can turn to this fund and be covered by workers' comp through the state, through a protective guarantee fund if you're injured at work, just like other people whose employers had insurance. The fund is broke, flat out broke.
It's been broke for a while.
It's been broke for a while, and there is nothing moving forward. It's just not a priority.
Yeah, this is something I talked about a couple of years ago, and I'll ask the same question I asked then. Why is it when someone doesn't have this workers' comp protection, why is it we don't lock them up and take all their assets and shut their business down?
Well, The answer is most employers who don't have workers' comp insurance are on the brink of going under anyway, generally speaking. They're fly-by-nighters. So the answer is we do and can, in some instances, seize assets if we could find them. But the solution was the right solution. Create a fund to provide insurance for injured workers who, through no fault of their own, are working for an irresponsible employer that doesn't have it. Have the insurance industry, through a combination of premiums, fund it, and there's some matching by the state. But it's broke, and there's no move to fix the funding. So right now, as it stands, when we have clients coming into us who have a serious work injury and an uninsured employer, we're telling them, we'll take the case and we'll prosecute it, but hold on to your hat for the day you receive benefits, because it's going to be a while.
So what happens then? I mean, if someone, you're just out of luck? I mean, you get no care? What happens to these people if they're filing a claim, they truly believe their company was supposed to have it, and they don't? They're just out of luck?
Once they get broke enough, Rick, they can apply for and receive medical assistance.
Oh,
you want to hear the truth? There you have it. They go on welfare while their comp claim is pending. Men and women with dignity, with pride, with jobs, working for an employer who didn't have comp insurance, go under and go on welfare to survive.
Well, the good thing is we're business friendly, though, John.
Well, and I'm glad for it. Thank goodness.
Ugly stuff. So what do we do? Last question. How do we? What do we do on this? Other than, in my opinion, and you don't have to say a word, November, you vote for Tom Wolf and John Fetterman. Make sure that at least we have that firewall to ensure that the horrible that could pass gets vetoed, and maybe get rid of some of these Republicans who are pushing this poison. But outside of that, what should folks be doing?
I think one of the things I say oftentimes too late, but on your show I can say it now, as difficult as it may seem and as difficult as it may be to budget, you've seen the commercial, Aflac. You can insure for a work injury or a disability. You can check pricing, you can look at but you can self-insure. And if you purchase the insurance, and I'm not in that industry, I'm not selling that industry, I'm just saying one thing you could do to avoid catastrophe would be to make sure you're looking where premiums are reasonable at disability coverage for your mortgage. This again, you got to look carefully at whether you're making the right economic decision, but there are private insurance options that are sometimes not all that expensive that can provide you with some measure of protection against the catastrophe. The other thing you can do is make doggone sure you're not working for an uninsured employer. I mean, that should be, if you're engaged in employment with somebody that seems kind of shaky, take some personal responsibility. Ask some questions. Have the guts to say, can I don't want to say see the, but those are some practical tips.
Is there a way to check through the state to find out if your employer is
Yes,
covered?
Absolutely. You can go on the State Department of Labor and Industry website, can tell you whether your employer has filed and obtained workers' compensation insurance.
That's probably the best way to go to make sure. And you're right. The other part of it is a little insurance never hurt anybody. But at the end of it, the state should be making sure that people are protected. It's just crazy. John, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. You got a website you want to send people to?
It's My Comp Lawyers. My Comp Lawyers with an S is our website. If they have any problems, anything they need, just go to www.mycomplawyers.com. We're there to help.
Good stuff. John Fromer, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Rick, great show.
Good talking with you. Again, My Comp Lawyers, the website. We'll get a link out so people can take a look at it. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Our weapon solidarity. Jim Beals and Karen Silkwood, the list goes on and on. With every year that passes, 60,000 more gone. Oh, it's a war on the workers. War on the workers. Oh, it's a war on the workers. War on the workers. Oh, it's a war on the workers. And it's time we started calling the shots.
You're proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1865. That was the day that 2,000 Union soldiers marched into Galveston, Texas. With them, they carried the news that those enslaved were now free. The Confederate General Robert E. Lee had actually surrendered more than 2 months earlier. Why then was there a delay in delivering the news of emancipation to Texas? It might have been that there were not enough federal troops to enforce the order. It has also been speculated that freedom was postponed to allow enough time for the enslaved workforce to harvest one last crop of cotton before freedom. Whatever the reason, General Order Number 3 finally was delivered. It read, quote, "The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation of the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. And the connection existing between them becomes that between employer and free laborer." On hearing of the news, the newly freed people celebrated. The next year, they celebrated again in a holiday that became known as Juneteenth. In the years that followed, the holiday spread to other cities. But in the segregated South, black residents were often barred from holding Juneteenth events on public land. That is why in 1872, several black men in Houston purchased property and established Emancipation Park as a space to hold the celebration. In 1980, Texas became the first state to formally recognize Juneteenth. Today, this holiday is celebrated in black neighborhoods across the country, with gatherings, barbecues, songs, and remembrances of the fight for freedom. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery for this war is one you're bound to lose. Are you fascists bound to lose?
I gotta tell you, the workers' comp stuff can get into the weeds and can get boring and can get your head swimming because it's so technical and it's so dry. But ask any person who's ever been injured on the job just how important it is. And, the thing is, I've known so many people throughout the years who have gotten the short end of the stick on it and really gotten screwed over. And to hear that, they're trying to really, limit the amount of care that someone can get, limit the amount, whatever medications your doctor thinks you should be able to use and will help you get better. It's just as John pointed out, it's all about money. It's all about cutting costs. It's the reform that they keep talking about is about, stealing from it, making sure that injured workers don't have access to it. And this isn't just Pennsylvania. This is all across the country. This is part of what I call the No Rights at Work agenda. It's taking back what was compromised over and fought for. Because understand, and I've said, maybe it's time that we start admitting that we allowed the whole New Deal era reforms, the early 20th century era reforms for labor to go by the wayside. And workers' comp is one of those, in that the grand bargain was, I give up my constitutional right to sue. I give up my constitutional right to access the court system to sue for damages. And the employer gets to not be sued, and they agree to pay, wages, health costs, and whatever the injury is. And as John pointed out, no health care for the family, no health care for anything outside of the injury. For instance, I injured a knee. Let's say it's my left knee, and for years I'm gimping on the other, and the right knee goes. Sorry, that's not covered. Only the left, even though the left knee caused all kinds of chaos and arthritis and all kinds, not covered. And the wages never go up. I mean, it's just so much to it. And for me, there's got to be a point at which we go, you know what? The grand bargain has been broken. Give me my access back to the courts. Just seems to me that's the way it's going. But again, this is a way to privatize the court system into another venue. And also, one of the things I bring up about Pennsylvania's workers' compensation laws, it still to this day looks at the employer-employee relationship as that of master and servant, which kind of tells you the thought process that goes into all of this. It's not about it's not about keeping workers safe. It's not about helping them heal. It's not about any of that. It's about making sure employers are protected and shielded. That is the simple part of it. Anyway, if you've missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like time flood beneath the lunar sway, imperial, mysterious, in amorous ray. Democracy is coming.